So why don't we go ahead and get started? My name is Leslie Harris. I'm the membership officer for RSA, and I would like to welcome you to RSA Remote. In general, you can expect programming on the first and third Friday of the month, and we have a wide variety of different types of programming coming up. So I think everybody will really like the types of things that we're going to be having, and it'll be a big variety. And I want to thank Casey Boyle in particular for working behind the scenes and making all of this happen. He did a lot of work to find the technical solutions that we needed in order to make all of this work. So this is a live recording, and we will have this recording available after the programming is done. We also have a live streaming captioning service. And so towards the top of your screen, like on the top left side of your screen, you should see something that says live, custom live streaming service. If you click on that, you'll see a transcript of what's happening on the screen. We also will have time for question and answer, and you'll see a little tab on the bottom of your screen that says Q&A. If you have any questions, go ahead and type those in, and we will do our best to address any questions. And there will be a time for question and answer towards the end of this talk. So I would like to introduce our two speakers for today. Amanda Nell Edgar is an assistant professor of communication at the University of Memphis. She's the co-author of the book, The Struggle Over Black Lives Matter and All Lives Matter, and the author of Culturally Speaking, The Rhetoric of Voice and Identity in a Mediated Culture, as well as numerous other journal articles. She was a recipient of the Janice Hawker Rushing Early Career Research Award from the Southern States Communication Association. Our other speaker is Andre E. Johnson, who's an associate professor of rhetoric and media studies in the Department of Communication and Film at the University of Memphis. In addition to being co-author of The Struggle Over Black Lives Matter and All Lives Matter, and author of numerous journal articles, he's authored 2 additional books: No Future in This Country, The Prophetic Pessimism of Bishop Henry McNeil Turner, and The Forgotten Prophet, Bishop Henry McNeil Turner and the African American Prophetic Tradition. He is also the editor of the book Urban God Talk, Constructing a Hip Hop Spirituality. So today's talk will be about Drs. Edgar and Johnson's book, The Struggle Over Black Lives Matter and All Lives Matter, winner of the 2018 the National Communication Association African American Communication and Cultural Division Outstanding Book Award. Their book is now available in paperback, and it remains important and relevant and interesting research for our current time. So join me in welcoming Drs. Johnson and Edgar.
Well, thank you so much for having us, Leslie. So happy to be here to kick off.
And thank you. Yes, I'm happy to be here as well, and to be alongside my colleague and good friend, Dr. Edgar.
So we wanted to get started just by talking a little bit about how we came upon this project. And I actually want to shout out too, if you'll notice Dr. Johnson's background, it's a picture by Andrea Morales of one of the BLM protests in Memphis. She's also the photographer that took the amazing picture that became the cover of our book. I love to see that background, Andre. So I wanted to start by talking a little bit about how we came to the project. So in fall of 2015, Andre and I were both starting at the University of Memphis. We happen to have offices that are next door to each other. And 2015, of course, is a time when Black Lives Matter is really picking up both in movement activism, but also in online social media conversation on Twitter, Facebook, and then also in longer form pieces on Medium, and then more sort of formal publication spaces as well. So we were talking about this, the movement, as well as the All Lives Matter counter movement. At that time, there also was a lot of posting regarding Blue Lives Matter, Police Lives Matter, White Lives Matter, and we were just seeing this hashtag being kind of twisted and bent in all kinds of ways. that really read as a distraction from the really important message of Black Lives Matter, both in terms of police brutality and state-sanctioned violence, but also in terms of all of the other many messages that we'll talk about in this presentation that Black Lives Matter Memphis was invested in. Things like public education, housing, income equality, all kinds of other issues that intersect with race and class and gender and sexuality. So as we were talking through, what we were wondering was how do the messages that we're seeing on social media, how do these sort of formal rhetorical forms correspond with and build on the way that people are talking about this movement on the ground? And how also does that apply not only to Black Lives Matter, but to this sort of emerging counter movement, although I think we'd be hesitant to call All Lives Matter a movement. Certainly it's a counter to the Black Lives Matter movement. So we first applied for a grant and received a grant from the Hooks Institute for Social Change at the University of Memphis. That allowed us then to bring people onto our campus back in the time before COVID, when you could bring people to your campus. And we were able to get focus groups together to talk about their experiences separately, Black Lives Matter folks, and also All Lives Matter folks in separate groups. So then from there, we started to see so much rich data that we realized that this was really more than a journal article. And so we decided to put together this book, and we're so happy to be here to talk about it. So today we thought we would just go through each of the chapters. We're going to alternate and just talk a little bit about the findings that we brought up, but we also really are eager to answer your questions. So we hope that everybody that is here, thank you for being here, will speak up and ask questions during the question and answer part after we've talked through the book a bit.
All right, and again, my name is Andre, and I am thrilled to be a part of this discussion. This is a opportunity, of course, to talk about the book, but also to talk about something that is near and dear to my heart and that I am passionate about. So when Dr. Edgar came to me and said, hey, I got this idea, I was readily available and wanted to do it because not only, you know, when I talk about, you know, the BLM and ALM book, I have to remind people that not only am I a researcher or a scholar, but I'm also a participant. I'm also part of the movement. I'm also part of the community engagement here in Memphis. So many of the activists, many of the people who were out, many of those people that were on the bridge that night and with other protests, I know, I have worked with, I have talked with, I have tried to share experiences with, and so on and so forth. So this was near and dear to my heart, and it was so good to be able to get a, and I think we would call it just an up close, on the street, in the street view of what these, what BLM movement and ALM were actually, you know, talking about. Before the book, one of the things that we were noticing in the scholarship, and it was new scholarship coming out, that many people were offering their own theoretical frameworks and you know, talking about what Black Lives Matter meant, you know, to them. Well, Amanda had the radical idea, let's ask BLM activists. Let's just see what does that mean to you? And our focus groups were just powerful. They really help unpack meaning and definition, even helped me, even a person that has been, you know, part of the movement, a person that has been on the ground praying in prayer vigils and doing those roadside memorials and all of that. They really helped me to begin to unpack and understand what it means when a person says, or when they say Black Lives Matter. So, and like Amanda said, we're going to just go through the book real quick. Like chapter 1 is the ways that BLM affiliates define the emergence and meaning of BLM movement. So we thought that chapter 1 should have just started off. What do we mean when we say Black Lives Matter, or when they say Black Lives Matter? Well, maybe for many Americans, we wrote, BLM is a movement without any clear meaning. For advocates and activists in the movement, BLM not only has meaning, but also has mission and purpose. And we really want to reiterate that whole notion of mission and purpose. One of the biggest critiques with BLM was, hey, they are just out there, they're wilding out there, don't have any kind of purpose, any kind of meaning, any kind of substance. What do you want? What's the agenda? No, they really had all of that. And a lot of people were surprised, because a lot of people in this latest reiteration, if you will, of BLM after the murder of George Floyd, that everybody's like, oh, wait a minute, oh, I know this. Well, it was already there back in 2016, 2015, 2014, 2013, and people were articulating this then. So we began to, in chapter 1, try to unpack that. BLM as a social movement was thoroughly researched. They had a thoroughly researched agenda coupled with plans and programs outlining the way forward. But we also talked about, and this is the interesting part, since I do like history as well, we talked about misremembering. And the first part of the middle part of the chapter is that we talked about how both BLM and civil rights activists and the veterans of the civil rights movement kind of misremember each other, and they talk past each other. And if they will just stay in the room long enough, they will begin to understand that they have a whole lot of stuff in common. So for instance, civil rights veterans were saying, we didn't do it like BLM. They were so confrontational. They are so, they're out there in your face, and we were just nice, and we just protest the right way, and we won hearts and minds. And that was not the case at all, because we just commemorated and celebrated the life and legacy of John Lewis. And if those clips remind us of anything, it was that the same vitriol that were given to BLM activists today was the same vitriol that was given back in 65, 64, 63. And a whole lot of people suffered and took a lot of abuse just trying to be a citizen and trying to speak up about some of the same stuff, and exactly in a lot of cases the same stuff that we're talking about today. So we talk about that in the chapter as well, and then of course we let the participants' voices be heard in the rest of the chapter, and then we kind of conclude with an understanding that as much as today's activists talk about this is not your grandparents' movement, or you can catch these hands and all of that, that it is not that cut and dry. Many of the activists today are building upon the work that activists did yesterday and the day after yesterday, and they are building on it, seeing it in their own way, in their own context, but they're still building upon that work. And we make the connection between the civil rights legacy and all Black liberation movements, from the civil rights legacy on up today. Chapter 1.
Absolutely. So as we're sort of introducing these two groups in the book, we also wanted to take a chapter and really introduce what on earth do people mean when they say all lives matter. And I will say, we really went into this thinking that we were going to have a very ideologically unified group of all lives matter people. And I'll say that the reason for that was that a lot of the think pieces, a lot of the takes that were being posted on social media were really saying all lives matter is basically an expression of white fragility. So that is true in some cases. Certainly that is true in some cases. But we were both really surprised that our demographic makeup, particularly our racial demographic makeup of the people that wanted to come speak to us supporting All Lives Matter really mirrored the racial demographics of Memphis. And the other thing was that our All Lives Matter groups really had such a diversity of ideas of what they meant by All Lives Matter, what they understood All Lives Matter to mean when other people shared it, and what they meant, what they understood Black Lives Matter to mean. So the thing that I want to highlight from chapter 2 is that one thing we really saw that does go along really with counter movement literature is that a lot of what the All Lives Matter folks were doing was taking the actual messages, whether they realized or not, of Black Lives Matter and turning them around, co-opting them, and sort of reversing them onto Black Lives Matter. So one of the examples that really jumps out, and then this would also become Patrice Kahn-Kohlers, who's one of the founders of Black Lives Matter, her memoir, When They Call You a Terrorist, really gets at one of the things that All Lives Matter really wanted to do was label Black Lives Matter as a violent organization. So this is not only a co-optation, of course, of Black Lives Matter speaking out against the literal murderous violence of police against people of color and specifically Black people. It's also just false, right? And so some of the examples that we brought up from our participants, one participant even mentioned seeing Facebook posts about Black Lives Matter in which Black Lives Matter advocates were supposedly murdering babies. So some of the things that folks shared with us were really disturbing. I think it's one reason that it was so important to talk to people, because I don't see that on my Facebook feed. But what we saw there was just a total reversal of the fact that Black Lives Matter was calling for an end to violence with labeling Black Lives Matter as a violent organization. A second way that we saw this sort of co-optation and reversal, one of Black Lives Matter's major arguments is for education, particularly in the city of Memphis, where we have a pretty troubling history of racial segregation and unequal access to quality education within the city and the county as well. One thing that a lot of the folks we talked to about All Lives Matter would say was, well, why aren't they focused on the real issues like public education? Well, if we would go down the hall and talk to the Black Lives Matter group, a lot of times they would be talking about public education, things like housing, which obviously is related to education as well. And so one thing that we were seeing then was this reversal again, taking up this message that Black Lives Matter was very clearly stating, and All Lives Matter people taking that on and saying, well, what about this? So that popped up, like I said, in terms of violence, in terms of schooling, in terms of the idea of segregation, where a lot of All Lives Matter folks would claim Black Lives Matter was a segregationist organization. So that the way that we're kind of talking about this, while certainly white fragility shows up in that, really becomes a much larger issue than that as well, because it really is a fragility in response to changes in the status quo. So that we saw that from people who were not white, and we also saw that articulated in terms that weren't explicitly racial, so that ostensibly All Lives Matter folks were willing, they would say, to talk about race, but not on the terms that Black Lives Matter was. So thinking about chapter 2, we were interested in knowing what All Lives Matter meant, and perhaps the disappointing answer was it meant so many things. You'll have to get the book to find out more of what they said.
All right, and then chapter 3, we talked a little bit about faith and religion. In this chapter, we focus on our participants' use of religious language and their own understandings of religion and faith and spirituality that describe their involvement with Black Lives Matter. Now, while public discourses about religion within BLM frame faith as a contentious or unwelcome issue, many BLM participants understood and understand even today spirituality as central to the connection with the movement and Black liberation more generally. Though BLM arose as a secular movement, we argued in the book that this does not mean that participants were non-religious or anti-religious. Instead, for many participants, their positions within the church or the movement was mutually constitutive. By participating in Black Lives Matter, they were driven to make their churches more inclusive, a point that was particularly challenging, however, for white evangelical members of the movement. And so basically, here's the question. What does your faith have to do with you and Black Lives Matter? Why are you out there in the streets? And why are you online talking about hashtag Black Lives Matter? And basically people, a lot of them, and not surprising to me because like I said, I heard some of this before, and as a person of faith myself, my faith does dictate that I am in the streets as well. So it's not surprising, but the number of people who may not even affiliate with a religious institution at all still had a spirituality or some sort of a faith tradition that they can hold on to justify their actions in the street. Now, the big reveal to me in this chapter, and I think Amanda as well, is that for Black participants or Black adherents to Black Lives Matter that did not have a religious affiliation, they at least had a tradition that they had heard of, that they had, that their parents participated in, the Black liberation tradition that they could draw upon to find some justification to do the things that they were doing within Black, and they talked about that, like Black theology matters, Black liberation matters, Black spirituality matters. One of the best responses from a person who was just getting back into her religious institution. She said, "My God is Black, my God is female." And that pushed her, that understanding of God, that understanding of the Blackness of God and the femaleness of God, or the womanness of God, pushed her into understanding that she needed to be part of the movement. So that was easy for them. It was the white participants who affirmed Black Lives Matter that really wrestled with their tradition as it related to faith. So much so that many of them could not make their reconciliation, and many of them had to break away, or they had to somehow on the margins begin to reimagine and rethink what a theology would look like, or a faith tradition would look like to justify working with Black Lives Matter. And that is actually something that I hope I have time to really work with and unpack some more, because I find it real fascinating that that some of the participants almost just literally said that my faith tells me I shouldn't be out here. My faith has nothing to do with me. I just think I'm being called, I'm being pushed. And that's another thing. We heard a lot of call language. I'm being pushed to come out and to do these type of things by something within me that that doesn't make any sense right now, but I'm trying to figure it out as I go along. So chapter 3 was is a very interesting chapter, and I'm echoing Amanda, get the book and read some of those responses about how religion and faith and spirituality played, and the role that it's played into having people support Black Lives Matter.
To kind of piggyback off of what Andre's saying, it was not only Black Lives Matter people who were driven by something intangible inside to their allegiance. What All Lives Matter folks were driven by, sometimes their religion, but across the board, All Lives Matter people seemed driven to support All Lives Matter on the basis of just profound and disillusioning fear. So what we heard over and over and over from All Lives Matter folks was that they were driven by particular fears. Whereas, I should point out that Black Lives Matter, of course, is driven by actual fears, fears of police violence, fears of economic discrimination that can be debilitating, actual documentable, verifiable fears. All Lives Matter people tended to pull from personal experiences to share individual fears and again say, what about this group? So in a lot of cases, this was related to children being harmed. And I mentioned that horrifying example earlier. There were other really horrible things that people wanted to share. But one thing we point out in this chapter was a lot of times when we met with All Lives Matter folks, it really felt as though they were needing to unburden themselves, really needing someone to listen to them and kind of hear what they were having to say. But the thing that we point out here is that even though folks are bringing up fears from terrorism to surveillance to a massive global epidemic, by the way, even though these fears are so dispersed and distributed, the major issue is that these were fears that were causing them to turn inward. So whereas collectively, of course, we can fight for change as Black Lives Matter is doing, and whereas a lot of the concerns that All Lives Matter folks had are concerns being addressed by Black Lives Matter, the particular types of fear and expression of fear that All Lives Matter folks had was really tending to turn them inward to their own household or even into their own self. So that in some ways, is particularly sad because whereas your fears really could have perhaps been alleviated by joining a group of like-minded people who would support you and help you fight for change, instead to sort of turn inward and really hide from and think of your fear as only an individualized issue is something that we were seeing from All Lives Matter, and something, not coincidentally, that really aligns with how we understand post-racialism and the way that post-racialism is often expressed contemporarily as focus on the individual as opposed to the focus on the communal. So really what we're seeing is kind of the convergence of fear and post-racialism in this particular post-Obama moment.
And then it's chapter 5. You want to, get started in chapter 5 because I can say, I can talk about the surveillance piece of it.
No doubt.
Part.
No doubt. Sure. So in chapter 5, we wanted to bring our groups together for one chapter. And the thing that we were seeing across was the idea of self-surveillance and self-censorship. So this is something that of course there's a long history of, as with really everything we're writing about here, but of the very real idea that you may be surveilled for the things that you say. During the mid-century civil rights movement, you might be surveilled through all kinds of, COINTELPRO is an example that jumps out, having to use the wide area telephone service to avoid telephone surveillance, these kinds of things. Social media, of course, makes that surveillance so much easier for the government, for your employer, for your family members who might disagree. So as we spoke with All Lives Matter and Black Lives Matter folks, one theme that we noticed emerging was that a lot of times people would really refrain from sharing what they felt and believed and their perspectives on Black Lives Matter and All Lives Matter because they were afraid of retribution from their employer or their family, which we would emphasize that one of the reasons that we wanted to speak to people in the first place, and I think as this particular theme demonstrates, these are things that we really couldn't have gathered from social media because it's literally things people are afraid to post. So while I do a lot of research, and Andre, you've done some of this too, of pulling discourses from social media, that's really important. But what we were seeing here was people really saying, I believe this thing, I believe in Black Lives Matter, I believe in All Lives Matter, but I'm really too afraid to share it.
And not only about just being concerned about your own safety and your own self-care. Sometimes people were telling us that they had to get off of line, get offline for a moment and just take a break from it. I was really interested in some of the folk who were after their activism and after some of their postings that were actually surveilled by police officers and by the state. And I happen to be one of the many activists that was also surveilled and trailed and whatever. And so one of the things a long time ago that I tried to do personally, and others have joined me in this effort, is that since we automatically think that people are reading and watching our posts, and sometimes if you follow me on Facebook or on Twitter, you'll see some of my live posts where I actually go live a lot of times at different types of direct actions. I now have to just say what I'm going to say and just be truthful about it and just be open, just understanding the fact. That does come a little bit of freedom in that, just saying that, listen, I'm going to say this and this is what I believe and this is who I am. And if you say I said this, and then okay, I said it. But that in and of itself is some sort of a self-surveillance type of measure to just speak your truth and to hold yourself accountable to your own truth. And we heard a lot of that back and forth as well too, as well as people who really wanted to try to have dialogue as much as you humanly possibly can on social media, trying to go into inboxes or DMs and trying to say, here's what I meant when I said this. I didn't want to make anybody upset, or why do you feel that certain type of way? I think in the long run, though, it maybe helped just a little, but for our participants, they really saw that, a lot of that, just the nature of the discourse itself and what people already come to social media or come to the talk, if you want to call it that, the conversation already believing, it is very, very hard to persuade or to convince or to do any of that type of work on social media. So again, as we got into the conclusion, moving right into the conclusion of the book, we do call for people just coming together and sitting down and beginning to have that dialogue and conversation.
Absolutely. So we wanted to make sure that we left a lot of time for question and answer. Leslie, were you gonna lead that Q&A?
Sure. So there aren't any questions right now. If anybody has questions, just type them into the Q&A box. Will Duffy asks, thanks for this, Andre and Amanda. One question I have is how you think the national response / protests over the murder of George Floyd has added to and or complicated the kinds of rhetorical distinctions you map between BLM and ALM.
We were talking about that a little bit today. Amanda, why don't you?
That's right. Andre, you want to go ahead? Thank you for your...
I was deferring to you, actually.
Oh, all right. So I think that's such a good question. And the thing that we were talking about today actually was whether we wanted to do a follow-up focus groups to find out the answer to that question. But one thing that I would say became clear even before we were finished writing was that All Lives Matter had really started when we started our interviews as kind of its own thing. People were very kind of bold in posting about it. Even by the end of recruitment, we were really seeing that if you would look at the Memphis area for All Lives Matter, it was only people making fun of All Lives Matter, which I think points out a really important problem of some of the methods where we might attempt to pull data off Twitter and kind of say, oh, this percentage was All Lives Matter, this percentage was Black Lives Matter, is that actually a lot of the posts of All Lives Matter were against it. And I think that one major difference if we did this now would be I don't think there's so much uncertainty over what all lives matter means anymore. That was a kind of a relic of the particular moment where we were gathering data. But by the end, I feel pretty certain that really Black Lives Matter's online organizing really won that. Black Lives Matter really made it very clear to people, if you are posting all lives matter, that is harmful to our cause. It's racist and you should not do that. So I think even by the end of recruiting, it became very difficult to get people to talk to us about all lives matter because it had become rightfully stigmatized. So that's what I would say about that. Andre?
Yeah, and I will only add from an activist point of view, it is, you know, yay, thank you. We've been 7 years, but, you know, we've been doing that for a while now, you know. And then it would be like consternation, right? It would be like, oh, okay, so what are we going to do now? And this really came out. The whole frustration, that whole question, Will, comes out of an understanding of the Drew Brees incident for me. When Drew Brees was asked about the flag and, you know, Colin Kaepernick, the flag, and the first answer he gave is like, I do not support anybody disrespecting our flag and disrespecting the troops because my grandfather fought in World War II. And everybody that was, you know, in the know or just took time to do a Google search would know that Kaepernick was not doing that for that reason. However, it becomes so embedded, it was so embedded in our culture that it just was the first response. And that's when everybody was like, come on, stop this. So this whole notion about Black truth finally breaking through was a relief, and maybe some things would get done, but also being careful about the co-optation and other things that power and folk in power typically tries to do to movements. And this is a historical, and this is historical as well. If we just studied the history of social movements. So everybody is just, you know, waiting and seeing what may happen with this new rhetorical understanding of what Black Lives Matter is really all about.
So Ashley Garcia asks, do you talk about the race card play and how that's used by the ALM counter movement? And this might also be related to Jennifer Courtney's question that whether post-racialism showed up in your research.
Sure.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Go ahead.
Yeah, so I guess I'm not sure when you say race card play, what I'm guessing is you mean ALM people saying that BLM is playing the race card. That's my guess of that question. Does that seem reasonable? Okay. All right, that's how I'm going to interpret it. I don't know that I heard that exact phrasing. I will say that I agree that that's absolutely related to post-racialism. So we saw just really a lot of the classic post-racialist language use. So the one that I always think of as a good example of how post-racialism gets kind of incorporated in these very repetitive ways actually are, I don't care if you're purple, green, red, orange. Mm-hmm. Well, no one is purple, green, right? Like that's not real. And so really what that's doing is displacing displacing the issue of race into some imaginary world where people are purple and green, right? But actually, we do have racism and white supremacy in our world where people are not purple and green, and we need to talk about that, and we need to solve those issues. So that was a thing that was brought up, was this imaginary kind of world. And then of course, a lot of the All Lives Matter people, you may have seen this online yourself, too, a lot of the All Lives Matter people would say, oh, well, what about police brutality against white people? What about police brutality against Latinx people? Black Lives Matter is concerned with that too, right? Solving police brutality is an issue that we all need to be invested in. And so I would say that's a second way that we saw post-racialism coming into play with the All Lives Matter folks.
All right. I won't add anything. I was just going to try to get to some more questions. So yeah.
All right. So Julia Medhurst asks, did you find any correspondence between folks identifying as supporting ALM and identifying as supporting a politically independent or conservative?
Not in my not in the people that I interviewed as such. However, I think we do need to add that there was a significant number of African Americans who, when asked what group you want to be associated with, they selected All Lives Matter. And I don't know their political leaning or anything, but many of them, you know, when they began to unpack it, they, of course, you know, knew that Black Lives Matter was important, but they thought rhetorically it would be better to say All Lives Matter because, you know, there's all this pushback with Black Lives Matter. And for a lot of the people who were people of faith, All Lives Matter was just a better message as it relates to their religion and it relates to their faith. And so they wanted to be inclusive of all people. And if we can just get that, then Black Lives Matter by default would matter if all lives did matter. So I thought I'd just throw that out as well too, but I don't remember any type of political leanings or no one saying one way or the other.
So I have another question. How does religious diversity in BLM and ALM manifest in both groups' ideologies and sources of support?
Right. Well, in Black Lives Matter, that manifests itself in a couple of ways. In order to be, I think, in order to affirm yourself in Black Lives Matter, especially if you are a proponent of the Black church or you're a supporter of the Black church or join a Black church or whatever, Black liberation theology becomes a major part of your theological framework and your theological rationale. Many of the interviewees mentioned that. I'm talking about James Cone, Renita Weems, womanist theology. I mean, and they were well versed on that. That got them to the place where they can comfortably say Black Lives Matter, talk about white supremacy and all of that. As far as support is concerned, there were pockets of support all over the place. You know, typically after a direct action, people will huddle up at some house or some restaurant or some gathering. All depends on the type of action. If the action got a little heated, as we'll say, maybe the support will come a little bit later. If people went to jail, for instance, which happens, you know, a lot actually, the goal is to have someone at the police station waiting on you till every last single person comes out, no matter, and you know, they pretty much try to, you know, keep them overnight or just try to make it as long as possible, right? So, but people still stay out. Others who can't stay the whole night will bring food, will bring water, something to drink, Gatorade, all of that type of stuff. Whole lot of singing, chanting, you know, until the last person is out. So that support system is there. And I think that is part of the spiritual connection. For a lot of people, that is church. That is what they get and feel close to the divine as they humanly possibly can without being a part of a religious institution or affiliation. Sometimes it's a better church too, by the way, but I digress.
So I think this relates to Janice Karakanoff's question. They asked, John Lewis said, I'm paraphrasing, that sometimes you need to walk your faith. Andre, I think you said or implied that this comes more easily for Black participants in the BLM movement. Did you discover a white tradition among any white supporters of faith that they could turn to?
And that's the question. Yeah, I mean, for people who well, the short answer in our study, pretty much the majority of people had to put their faith, the faith that they grew up with. I mean, we had ministers that were part of our conversation. They had to kind of like put their faith aside for a moment in order to do the thing. So they could not draw. I guess that's what I'm saying. They could not draw upon the tenets of their faith in order for them to justify, because when they got back to their church, they were castigated for it. People talked to them. They had meetings about them. I mean, a lot of folk had a lot of contentious moments in their own churches. So when folks saw one of the participants holding signs or marching or being with participants of Black Lives Matter, they were asked, what are you doing out there? That's not what we do. So they were not, so they were trying to say that, hey, I believe that God is calling me into this direction, and I'm learning and I'm discerning the spirit and how the spirit moves and all of that. But when they try to draw from that tradition, now the tradition did speak. So if you're a Methodist, of course, you got John Wesley, and Wesley does speak about that. I mean, you have, but the way that it's been taught and the embedded theology that many people grow up with doesn't speak to liberation and freedom and just, that John Lewis faith. It just doesn't speak to it. And so one of the things that I really would like to do for some future work is to unpack that. What does it mean when your whole faith tradition doesn't speak to justice in the streets or to stand like a John Lewis and others, and to say that I am here on behalf of the one who called me to be here. I mean, that whole prophetic liberationist tradition. What does that mean when you don't have that growing up or don't have that, in your wheelhouse to discern?
So Randy Fromm asks, first they say, thank you both for the informative discussion of your book. When Amanda was speaking about chapter 5, she said that you wanted to bring our groups together for one chapter. Did you actually get BLM activists and ALM activists to sit together and discuss their positions with each other? Or was this an analytic bringing together? And however you did it, what questions entered into and motivated your choice of approach for that chapter?
Great question. I said that unclearly. Just analytically, we were looking at all the transcripts, the Black Lives Matter group's transcripts and the All Lives Matter group transcripts, and noticing that there was this common theme of self-censorship. So we did not bring these different groups together to talk to one another. Really, we were asking the groups to come sit with us for, most groups spent about 90 minutes with us. So we thought that was a pretty sufficient ask on their time. But let me look at the end of that question. Oh, it's dismissed. I'm learning to use that. This is such a cool, thank you, Zoom. It's great. But what questions entered into motivated the choice of the approach really was, as we were working through the whole book, one thing we kept noticing was this is history repeating and often misremembered, but history happening over and over and over. And we thought, wow, this sense of self-surveillance and of being surveilled by outsiders, and also the sense of feeling like, should I say this? Or you know, at the best case scenario, will I lose a friend? At the worst case scenario, will there be violence enacted against me? Will I be killed? Is certainly something that reverberates through all of the different iterations of civil rights, racial, social movements. So that was one thing that we wanted to kind of think about is how are these historical moments replaying out in this contemporary kind of battle over the meaning of a social movement, Black Lives Matter in this case. And then again, how are all lives matter folks kind of framing themselves within that framework as well as a counter movement?
Mm-hmm.
So this is related to Amy Robillard's question. They ask, we know that BLM has a clear mission and purpose. Did you get a sense that the All Lives Matter people also had a mission and purpose, or that they even saw themselves as part of a larger group?
Go ahead.
Oh, go ahead.
No, I was going to say no.
Yeah, no.
I don't think, yeah, they were all over the place, right? Yeah. So, as I remember.
And in fact, in the book, in the introduction to the book, we make really clear, although we're using a counter movement theoretical frame, we really do not see All Lives Matter as a movement. So in the book, we talk about BLM, but we always use a hashtag with ALM. We weren't able to do that with the title of the book because it turns out that messes with search analytics. We had wanted to do that. Yeah, technical difficulties, I guess. But we're really clear in the intro that we would not call All Lives Matter a movement, even a counter movement, in terms of that they were in any way, you know, gathering in any kind of organized way.
So Diane Keeling asks, the NBA has taken a strong stance supporting BLM. If you're familiar with it, what do you think about the NBA's approach, like court displays of BLM jerseys? And how do you think that affects the responses of the to the movement?
Good question. Okay, I guess. I mean, it's just amplifying the message, and you know, that's okay. But I can tell you that activists are watching and, you know, looking at their list of demands and didn't see the NBA having a logo on the court as one of the demands, or, you know, I mean, and it's much easier to do it in a bubble. You don't have fans there. You don't have your majority white fans to give you some pushback if, you know, if it comes to that. So yes, I think it's a good thing to amplify the message, and to and all the sports leagues are trying to do that. But there's other things that they can do, like, you know, really speak out against the injustices that are happening right in their own hometowns. And you know, not just individual NBA players. We're talking about, if you know, teams coming together, or the league. And that's going to be a little bit tough. And this is, and let's just say it like this too. I mean, what we're talking about is prophetic movements, and prophetic movements challenge power. And power does not concede anything without demand, Frederick Douglass reminded us. So I mean, this is tough work. And yes, I mean, it is just real tough to take a stand. So people are negotiating, trying to find wherever they can be. And I have a saying: if you are at least coming to the table, you get the benefit of the doubt. So I give benefit of the doubt to everybody who has now, you know, seen the light, you know, and talking about Black Lives Matter, and talking about some of the injustices that people have been talking about for years. But what's really going to make the change is the power, the shift in the power dynamics, and the belief that things can change. That's one of the things you know, if I can just say this real quickly, that's one of the things that I think in this country that we don't have the capacity to imagine another world. That's what prophets do, though. They cast visions. They you know, this whole notion of that's John Lewis. That's why we love John Lewis so much. Cast this huge vision, but we just don't have the capacity anymore just to even imagine what it would look like if police were not as violent towards a certain group of people as they are against other people. We just don't even have that capacity. So until we start really getting into that realm, you know, I'm watching, I'm waiting, I'm seeing, but I do applaud the efforts. I do applaud the efforts of Major League Baseball, NBA, NFL, soccer, you know, and the WNBA. Now that's a whole nother, they have been there since like the beginning. They have been like, you know, no one has noticed that, but they have been there from the beginning. And so what the Atlanta Storm did the other day with Vote Warnock shirts, you know, they've been coming at it though for a long period of time. So we celebrate them as well.
So I think we only have time for one more question.
One more question. Oh.
I think this one might be a good opportunity to talk about the relationship between BLM and other racial and ethnic identities, or a broad swath of racial and ethnic identities. Michael Brooks asks, if they're wondering if you've spoken at length to members of the larger Asian community. They say, I'm half Korean and many of my friends and family are of various Eastern, Southeastern ethnicities. And there's a big line of division between generations, and a lot of the information the older generation receives is filtered and re-articulated so much before it reaches them. So do you have any thoughts about this?
I can say, can I just answer that real quickly? Quickly, in this last, again, reiteration, when we saw all of the marches around the country, that's going on right now. Finally having those type of dialogues. Because can we just be honest for a moment? You know, with Trayvon, with Mike Brown, with Tamir, with Sandra Bland, with Renisha McBride, with the whole host of other folk, wasn't a whole lot of other folk out there. Now we're getting this, you know, using Jesse Jackson's term, this rainbow coalition, and people are having conversations. It's nothing better than to really have a good conversation with folk on the ground. And just, you know, when you're out there and when the phalanx of officers come out at 10 o'clock at night and you're looking at, you know, who's next to you, that's a great opportunity to begin to have that dialogue. It's happening right now. That's one of the reasons why we were talking about earlier, probably doing a second book or doing a follow-up book, because we would like to chronicle some of those kind of conversations and discussions that's going on right now on the ground, which I know that are happening because there was a couple of meetings just here in Memphis just last week to talk about, you know, talking about the different alliances and how our common interests can be brought together and to be, you know, talked about and to present as a united front, since we are all now realizing that we're in this thing together. So it's happening right now. So I applaud that. That's all I want to say about that. Amanda, you want?
I couldn't have said it better myself. I think that what I read in that, that I'm so glad you chose that question. I love that. I hear a study. I want to read that study. So
right.
I hope you'll write it up.
Well, I want to thank Drs. Johnson and Edgar for their illuminating talk and such an interesting book and research that they're doing. And as I thank the rest of you for joining us, I want to remind you that this is an ongoing series. So our next RSA Remote event is titled Recruiting and Retaining Graduate Students of Color in Rhetoric. And we will be joined by Karma Chavez, Andre E. Johnson, again, lucky us, and Tamika Carey. And this will take place on Friday, August 21st, 2 weeks from today. And the exact time is going to be announced soon. So please check our social media and our website and our e-bulletins for that information. And thank you so much.
Thank you for having us.
And thank you. And do not let the fact that I am going to be a part of that other webinar stop you from coming. It's going to be great. Thank you, Leslie. Thanks, Casey. Thanks, everybody, for making this a wonderful, wonderful panel.